And we are live. This is the Bible Thumping Wingnut. I am not actually the Bible Thumping Wingnut, but this is the Bible Thumping Wingnut Show. We're glad to have you with us. I am Andrew Rappaport from Striving for Eternity Ministries, filling in the big shoes of Tim, the Bible Thumping Wingnut. We're glad to have you with us here. We're going to be discussing tonight with Matt Slick from CARM, CARM.org. That stands for Christian Apologetic Research Ministries, the site to go for anything apologetic related. We're going to be talking with Matt Slick about identifying bad arguments, also known as logical fallacies. And we're going to specifically, one of the new ones that may have to get added to the CARM list of logical fallacies is the Dillahunty dodge. Anyone who saw the show where Matt Slick and Matt Dillahunty had their discussion knows and saw firsthand what the Dillahunty dodge is. But before we bring Matt in and start discussing these things, what I do want to do is encourage all of you who watch this show regularly or listen on podcasts to consider going out to BibleThumpingWingnut.com, go to the Patreon account, and consider donating to Bible Thumping Wingnut to keep these type of shows on the air. Also want to encourage you to go to CARM.org, CARM.org. If you go over to I think it's on the right of that page, you will see an area where you can donate. And my suggestion is that you click donate there. To both ministries, I want to encourage you to donate monthly. Reason to donate monthly is because monthly donation allows ministries, especially like CARM, to basically be able to pay staff, an important thing to be able to do. So with that said, Matt Slick, how are you doing tonight?
Well, I'm doing all right. I'm starting to suffer from a little bit of a cough. My wife's been sick for over a week. My youngest daughter had a fever yesterday, and before my wife got sick, I had congestion for a week, and just today, a few hours ago, started coughing. So, just what's going around, and that's how I'm doing. Other than that, doing fine, hanging in there by God's grace.
Well, it's good. Now you got some planning. Why don't we give you an opportunity? You got an event coming up in April. You got some other things I think going on before that as well. But what's happening at CARM, and what can you tell us about what's happening in April?
Well, I've been doing just a whole bunch of research on Islam lately. I've been, went out to Michigan and spent a week out there doing debates and some TV stuff. And that was, really good. Got to meet some great people out there. So I've been just putting the nose to the grindstone, researching. And in fact, I stopped researching in order to do the show here. I'm doing research on reproductive methodologies and teachings inside of Islam. And then I have to do stuff on hygiene as well. Hopefully, we're going to be releasing pretty soon a coursework on Islam, where David Wood from AnsweringMuslims.com, he and I sat for several hours discussing Islam. And so we're getting that done and trying to push out some last minute fixes on that. Now, in April, you and I are going to be, Lord willing, on that cruise going out to the Bahamas as we seek to, just relax and also teach. So that's be in April. People are interested in that. They can go to the CARM website, right-hand side, and there's a link there for the cruise. It'll be taken to another website, a friend of ours' website. We're working with them, Mormonism Research Ministry, and we'll be out there in April doing that. And also, I just put it up, I think today or yesterday. I don't have the link information, everything yet, but I'll be out in Houston on the 16th for a debate on, of all things, the charismatic gifts. And normally I wouldn't really worry about debating something like that. It's not that big a deal. But apparently there's a guy who wants to debate it. Church wants me to come out and debate it. And also it's in Houston, so I could take some time and go see Joel Osteen's church, which for me would be a real treat for different reasons than most people might think. And so I thought about, that'd be a good opportunity to get out there and do that. And be able to say, I've been to the church, been through a service, and the whole bit. So that's why I'll be doing that debate, and more details on that.
So you and Joel
later.
will be hanging out together like
Oh,
buddies,
yeah.
maybe some coffee.
I like to just officially offer Joel Osteen. I would be glad to fly out to Houston and hang with him for a week and teach him biblical theology. Take about a week, and go over and just discuss stuff. He can clear his schedule out. We can just discuss theology and what the essentials of the faith are, and the issue of compromise, and other things. I'm sure he's not going to take me up on it. In fact, I offer that to Joyce Meyer as well. If she wants to take me up on that, I'd be glad to spend a week with her, teaching her biblical theology also. But,
Would they understand what theology is?
They would.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, they would. But, as is often the case, most Christians don't realize a lot of things about Christian theology, and so they think they have a good understanding of things when they really don't. And particularly Joyce Meyer has taught some heresies, and Joel Osteen has too. They need to be far more grounded in the faith. It bothers me. I'm going to pick on Joyce Meyer for a minute, and Joel Osteen. Why is it the elders aren't calling them on the carpet for the things that they're teaching? The elders are supposed to do that. The elders are not doing it. So I think the elders need to be involved in the teaching session as well, for both groups. I'd be glad to do them both, to help them out, teach them, and the elders. They need that.
So you're going to go out for a debate in Houston where you're going to be on the wrong side of the argument, and but that's okay. That's okay.
I'm for the continuation of all the charismatic gifts, just like the Bible teaches.
Yeah, as long as you cut out 1 Corinthians 13. But that's right. So
that's a strong. I love going to 1 Corinthians 13. That's the backbone.
Yeah, you and I may actually have to do a good theological discussion on that one day. I know some people have asked for that. But on the cruise, some topics for folks if they're interested in going to the cruise, where Matt Slick will be one of the keynotes. And some folks from Mormon Research Ministries are really the guys that are doing a lot of the organizing for it. So here's some of the topics that we got. Matt will open us up with apologetics in the 21st century. We're going to have why worldviews are important. Bill McKeever is going to talk on Mormonism. Kind of funny he'd talk on Mormonism being the head of Mormon Research Ministry, right? But I will be doing one on Bible and Mormonism. What did I say?
Mormonism Research Ministry. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll be doing one on Bible interpretation made easy. We'll have
be doing that because you obviously have some serious problems. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah. I take the Bible literally when it says tongues will cease. I do too. Bill McKeever is going to be doing one on that'll be interesting as we talk tonight on recognizing logical fallacies. Eric Johnson is going to be doing a two-part on is it possible to trust the Bible. Then as we will be in Jamaica, we'll talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls and its relevance to the Bible. Matt and I will be doing a joint discussion on Islam. I'll do one on evangelism training, and Michael Rabbis will do what should the modern Mormon really believe. That'll be a two-part one. Eric Johnson's going to be doing one on 10 most awesome archaeological discoveries. We'll be talking about Jehovah's Witnesses. Bill McKeever is going to be doing, and this I'm really upset that I will be teaching on Jehovah's Witnesses during Bill McKeever's talk. He's going to be doing a two-part, a Christian response to the issue of homosexuality. Matt Slick will be covering Roman Catholicism, and also he'll do another two-part session called Theology in Sneakers. I will cover one on the uniqueness of Christianity, and there's going to be some other breakout panels and discussions. So if you're interested in going on that cruise in April, it will be immediately after the Ohio Fire. For those who want to come out to Ohio Fire, meet the Bible-thumping wingnuts themselves. And with that, I should say that there is a T-shirt you can get at Wrath and Grace that is going to be supporting Bible-thumping wingnuts so that they can make it out to the events and do some of the interviews that they're going to be doing. So, with all of that said, Matt Slick, I am looking on an article at carm.org called Logical Fallacies or the Fallacy in Argumentation.
Right.
There are 20 fallacies that you have here, and we know of a 21st that needs to be added.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
And so why don't we start with the 21st one, because that is one that we have been seeing. Anyone who's really been dealing with the professing atheists online has been seeing what you have called the Dillahunty dodge. We have been seeing this quite often. So could you define that and give us some examples of it?
Yeah, real quickly. The Dillahunty dodge is exemplified best by Matt Dillahunty, the atheist, whose MO, whose modus operandi, is to discuss things with people he disagrees with, but he never really commits to anything so that he cannot be cross-examined. He dodges cross-examination by just not committing to anything. His strategy is to wait for someone else to make a statement, then he jumps on the statement and tries to get them to validate their statement. So that's called the Dillahunty dodge. He doesn't commit, so he can't be cross-examined. That's the main thing. I'm sure he commits here and there to things, but he doesn't want his ideas cross-examined. And that just, in my opinion, is two-pronged. It's just a technique, but it's also an admission of the weakness of his position. Now, just so you know, last encounter we had on this program, I don't know how many months ago, he said that he would set up a debate, call a friend of his or whoever it was to arrange it, and he and I would do a debate. I have yet to hear from anybody about a debate that he agreed to do. Maybe that's just that's another manifestation of the Dillahunty dodge. Who knows?
I was going to ask you, is he dodging the debate?
Maybe, I don't know.
No, okay, so we see this often, Matt. We see people who will say, well, I have, and this is how I most often see the argument is, well, I'm an atheist, and I just lack a belief in God. You say God exists, you have to support it. I mean, that almost sounds like a form of the Dillahunty dodge.
Yeah, well, when they say lack of belief, all they're doing is just saying that they are trying to hold a position that really isn't a position. And the way I illustrate this is I'll say, look, I'm thinking of a concept in my mind. Now, is the concept correct or not correct? And they'll say, well, I don't know. Well, what's the concept? I said, I'm not going to tell you, not for a while. I'm not going to tell you what it is, because if I do, then you have to make a decision. But, so go ahead, make a decision right now. Is it true or false, correct or not correct? And it's ridiculous. They can't. And I say, well, that's how you lack belief in something, because you don't have any awareness of what it is. It's a complete lack. There's nothing there. Invariably, what we do when we see something or we encounter something is we do basically one of three things: affirm, deny, or we wait for further information so that we might make a better assessment. So the concept I was thinking about was there's an ice cream factory on the fourth largest moon of Jupiter. Now, I would hope that when I reveal that concept, that people would then say, well, I deny it. Now, there might be some who would affirm it, but there might be some who say, well, I lack a commitment either way. Okay, if they lack commitment, that means they're aware of the concept. And what they've done with the concept is they've designated it as something that needs more evidence, more logical examination, or whatever. They don't have a lack of belief in it. There's no lack there. There's actually an intellectual position to do something with it later on. It's an assessment condition, and not a lack. Lack is just nothing.
Would it be fair to say that when they argue that they profess to be atheists, that is actually a belief in something?
It's a worldview. They're going to say, no, it's not a worldview, but yes, it is. It's a view of the world without God. We have a view of the world with God. And out of those things are ramifications. We can extrapolate certain requirements from those things. If you're going to hold to the idea there is no God, then there can be no universal consciousness. If there's no universal consciousness, there are certain conditions that would be affected by that philosophically. If you are an atheist, what kind of an atheist are you? Are you a materialist? If you're a materialist, that's self-refuting. And there's different ways to deal with various issues of atheism. And so, in my opinion, what atheists have done over the years, and I've been debating them now for, I don't know, approaching 10-ish years, I guess, is they are more and more retreating into the ultimate of the Dillahunty dodge. No commitment, no assertion, no nothing, double negative there, just kind of hanging in intellectual limbo so that their ethereal non-essence can't be captured, photographed, or examined. That's the idea that most atheists are there. But I test them. Because when they say they lack belief, what else do we say? Okay, well, okay. The Bible says God exists, so therefore God exists. Well, generally, what's going to happen is they're going to say, you can't just say that. That's not work. They say, well, wait a minute. You're lacking belief in God's existence. Why are you jumping on and say that my argument is invalid? Or is it that it's logically invalid? Or is it that it's true? Because you don't know if it's true or not. The Bible says God exists, and therefore God exists. Because the Bible reveals God's existence, just as nature does. So is it true or is it not true? What are you going to say? Then they're having to make a commitment here and defend a position. So the idea is to draw them out of their dark corner into the light so that they can be cross-examined. But they're not dumb. They don't want to be cross-examined. They want to hide in the darkness, in the abstraction of nothingness and lack, in order to, so to speak, assail the arguments that are presented to them so that they can...
We just lost Matt's, muted himself accidentally.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
That they would feel a little bit superior in not being able to be cross-examined, but for them to be able to cross-examine everybody else. It's what they're doing, you know, and we call all of it the Dillahunty dodge.
Okay, so and it's you actually got to the next thing I was going to ask is how to respond to it, because that's the thing. It's one of the things we want to try and do with each of these is show how to identify each of these logical fallacies, and then how do you respond to it? How do you deal with it when someone does this? And the Dillahunty dodge is becoming one that we're seeing more and more, where people just they don't want to take a position, and so really your argument is to try to force the position, try to force them into the discussion. If they continue to refuse, and sometimes, you know, you've done this here on this channel before, where you've just said, okay, end the conversation. Why? Because if they're going to keep dodging, I think you had that 2 weeks ago where you had a gentleman that was not going to accept any definition for anything.
Yeah,
and you just said, then there's no reason to talk.
Right. And then they complain. They say, I can't handle it and stuff like that, whatever. The fact is that there are variations of the Dillahunty dodge, and one of them, you know, is the Dillahunty definitional dodge. We could do subcategories. I don't know. The thing is that when they wanted, what's the definition of that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by this? You know, they just, I don't know. Just, you know, it would be too insulting here, but and I'm thinking of children who constantly ask why. We have to be careful that we don't fall into that ourselves, because we certainly can ask the question why and try and get to the heart of the matter, try and get to a terminus. But what I think a lot of atheists do is that they seek to undermine a Christian's position by asking which definition's the right one. How do you know? Justify that definition, justify this, justify that. And they put a great deal of pressure on the Christian to basically justify everything. And this is just more, in my opinion, just another way of trying to cloud the issue and not face the truth and face the facts.
Okay, and I should have mentioned this right at the beginning, more of a, I guess, housekeeping. Since YouTube prevents us from having comments, we cannot have comments in the live broadcasts anymore. One of the problems with that we now have, the way to join is to go to carm.org, go to Carm, and in Carm, what you do is go to the right side of the page. There is at the top, it says to participate, and that is how you can participate. I'm going to be editing the Hangout itself, so that people have the link to join. But the other thing I want to encourage everyone to do is basically, if you want to not be participating live, but you want to get in on the conversation, since there is no Mixler feed tonight, I want you to go to Bible Thumping Wingnut on Facebook. It is the Facebook page for Bible Thumping Wingnut. If you go there, I can add you to the Bible Thumping Wingnut group if you are not a member of that group. And what we will do is basically put you into the group, and there is a post toward the top or somewhere in there that reads, that has the identifying bad behavior or bad arguments link for the show, and that will be how you can put comments in there. I'll monitor that, and if there's questions that you don't want to actually join, that'll be a way you can jump in. So Matt,
what's the URL to the Facebook page? I'm trying to find it, and I'm having difficulty.
On Facebook, just type in the search Bible Thumping Wingnut, all one word.
I did. Well, I had 3 words. Let's see if it'll do it this way.
Okay, I will give that to you, Matt, here in chat. So, all right, so that being said, I was going to start in a different order here, Matt, because you have the ad hominem as your first one on the CARM, but we have someone who's here that wants to be able to talk about the straw man argument.
Sure.
So how about you start by defining what the straw man is, give an example of a straw man argument, and then we're going to bring John in to discuss that a little bit further.
The straw man argument is a misrepresentation of an argument in order to attack that misrepresentation. So, for example, in Islam, the Muslims teach that the Trinity is actually polytheism. They'll teach that, or the Quran teaches, the Hadith teach that Mary has been alluded to as part of the Godhead. Now, they don't believe that, but they say some Christians have taught that, and that Jesus is another God and things like that. And that's a misrepresentation of the doctrine of the Trinity. It was interesting, when I was out in Michigan about 3 weeks ago debating, I think it was during the breaks, my opponent, Osama Abdullah, I'm trying to remember his last name, I apologize for not getting that correct, but I asked him, I said, do you even understand what the Trinity is? This is between shows, you know, and he said, yeah, and I said, well, what is it? And he finally kind of got around to it, saying it was 3 distinct persons, and I say, and you understand it's a teaching there's one God? He said, no, it's not. It teaches 3 gods. I said, no, it doesn't. The Trinity, by definition, is one God. He said, no, it's not. And that was really interesting because he refused to believe the truth of what it actually is. That's an example of a straw man. When somebody will say that Trinity is 3 separate gods, or things like that, when it isn't. It's a misrepresentation of the actual argument in order to attack the actual argument. So when people do that, I agree with them. Say, for example, they'll say, well, you know, we refute the idea that Trinity, you know, that there's 3 gods. I go, well, I do too. I'm with you. I agree with you. And they think that they're arguing against me, but no, we both agree, because I don't believe that. And that's not what the Trinity is. You're misrepresenting it. That's a straw man argument. Okay.
So the goal of the straw man is basically so that they can feel that they won the argument, but they're really arguing against something that's not a valid point.
Right. It's not even what we believe. You know, it's something else.
So what do you do when you spot someone doing that? How should we handle that? If someone's doing that to us, as you had in that debate, how do we deal with it?
I call them names and then throw things at them. Or
that would be an ad hominem.
Oh, that would be no. An ad hominem actually, I think, is attacking the man in order to invalidate the argument. But nevertheless, what I do, you know, when people who do the straw man thing is I say, no, this is what the actual position is, and I just tell them the truth. If they reject that, well, that's between them and God. You know, they want to reject it because their position is so weak that they can't understand what the truth is, and they have to continue to misrepresent the opposing view. That's one of the things I'm very concerned about on my website. Is I definitely, absolutely seek to represent the other view that I'm attacking or analyzing. I try and represent it accurately, so that I'm attacking the real thing, not a false representation. Now, there've been times that I've misunderstood a few things, and that happens with researchers. It takes a while for us to hone our skills and our knowledge sets in certain areas. But my goal always is to represent the opposing view as accurately as possible. It doesn't seem to be the case with a lot of atheists and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and Muslims and others. But we should be people of integrity who don't seek to practice taqiyya, lying, and as Islam does, and we should always seek to represent the truth and know it and be corrected if we have something wrong about our understanding of something. Go ahead.
Okay. Oop. Let me.
I'm actually going to fix the arrangement on that.
There we go. I could not unmute myself there. So.
Well, that's not that bad.
Yeah, that could be a good thing. So, John, if you want to unmute yourself, and you had a question regarding the strawman argument.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Good.
So, anyways, my issues that I've been having with the strawman argument, and I think this is what it's under the same category, is under the topic of Calvinism, where those who are not for Calvinism would say that, and this is what I understand from what the straw man is that they'll say, for example, Calvinism is wrong because Calvin did such and such,
right.
And then therefore it is wrong. I mean, that's what I've come to understand.
Ad hominem.
That would be
okay. Ad hominem and genetic fallacy. The ad hominem is the seeking to attack the individual and invalidate the argument based on the individual. But it's synonymous here in this case with the genetic fallacy. Calvin was a murderer, therefore what he taught about the Bible can't be true. And the problem with that is, what if a child molester taught somebody algebra? Does it mean algebra is not true anymore? Of course not. And so the genetic fallacy is something that a great many people commit, particularly as you brought it up, and the issue of Calvinism. They'll attack John Calvin as though that invalidates the system of the systematics that he came up with, and people just don't know that it's irrelevant whether or not he was a good guy, bad guy, whatever. It doesn't make any difference. What
right.
is what he's teaching biblically based or not, and according to Scripture.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Another argument you could use, a really easy one, is the Volkswagen. As I have my website, the Volkswagen Beetle was developed by the Nazis. Okay, so don't drive Volkswagens then, right? Because they can't be good because they're developed by Nazis. Of course not. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay, I'm going to bring in the Meow's cat if he wants to unmute himself, because he did have and I know, Rocco, you were going to go next, but I wanted to bring him in because he wanted to go back to the Dillahunty Dodge. He had a comment on that, so I wanted to have him bring that up.
Yeah, it was a comment because I was actually, I don't know if I was in the Hangout when both Matts were talking about what Dillahunty was doing, for the Dillahunty now called Dodge. If I remember correctly, Matt, weren't you originally calling it the Dillahunty fallacy? And then when Matt Dillahunty came in, he was like, no, it's not a fallacy. It's not a fallacy because there's no logical issue here, or whatnot.
Yeah.
So you changed it to Dillahunty Dodge. Would that mean it's not a logical fallacy, or that you just conceded on the name to appease him?
Technically, it's not a fallacy because it's not, embedded in logic and things like that. It was a tongue-in-cheek way, the Dillahunty fallacy, and he took personal umbrage to it. And if you remember, he took like 20 minutes to. It's actually something about his ego. You could tell was involved, because he kept hammering on it, hammering on it, hammering on it. So okay, let's call it the Dillahunty Dodge, and actually the word Dodge is more apropos to what he does.
Yeah, I think so
he
too.
just dodges. Yeah. So and it works fine because now it's a better comment, and it's an alliteration as well.
Yeah, which makes it more catchy.
Makes it more catchy. So thank you there, Matt. It's fine. And it was never meant to be a formalized logical fallacy. It's just a fallacy. People make fallacies of all kinds. And so he just wanted to work it. So that's fine. But now it's called the Dillahunty Dodge, which I
But
think
it
is
is a
even better.
bad argument. It is a bad way to handle a debate or
Yeah.
a discussion in a logical way.
Well, yeah, because I mean, if you're not taking a position on something, do you actually have ground to stand on in order to level at an accusation or make a comment on someone else's position?
Well, there may be yes and no to that, but someone could just sit there and listen to somebody else and just demolish their arguments if their arguments are bad. What if I were to sit there and commit the genetic fallacy, and someone were to say, Matt, that's the genetic fallacy, you can't use that, and it just doesn't work. Well, whether or not the person makes a commitment to anything or not doesn't negate the truth of what the person will be saying about committing that error, about me committing that error in that context.
Oh,
So he's
gotcha.
not, it's okay. However, it's atheism versus theism, and that's the whole context. And when he enters into that, he represents atheism. And we know that he makes a lot of money out of his YouTube videos, and he's an atheist present. And so when he comes in, what he does is he commits I call it the Dillahunty Dodge at that point. He doesn't want to be cross-examined. Now, I do want to have a debate with him, a public debate. I'll fly down to Texas and do that, not a problem. And we'll just have a nice formal debate. But we'd have to agree on the topic.
You'd probably have to do what Cy had to do, which was regularly and publicly call him out and expose that he's dodging the debate. I mean, that's really what when Cy ended up finally getting a debate with him, that's what he had to do.
Yeah.
Well,
it's been a year now or so. I'm not exactly sure, but every now and then I'll just keep mentioning it, and it's like what it is. But you heard, if you guys were there, he said he agreed to do it. A debate. He said he would, and he said he would arrange. I forgot her name. I thought it was a female, to set it up. Now,
yeah, it's a female that because Cy had the same exact thing. I mean, agreed to a debate, and then he would deny that they ever agreed. But the thing was, Cy kept all the emails and all this different stuff.
Right.
But
right.
So Rocco, Rocco, if you want to unmute yourself and ask. Rocco he didn't exactly know what to call a fallacy, what fallacy would be, but he had a situation he wanted to describe and see what type of fallacy that is. So I've added you to the broadcast, Rocco.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
It's going.
Yeah. First of all, I'm getting over a cold myself. I have a bad cough, just like you, Matt. I've had it for about three weeks now, actually. So.
3 weeks. This cough. Oh
yeah.
boy.
Yeah.
So
be careful.
the worst I've ever had was a month.
And,
yeah. I
I'm
cracked
on the
ribs
way.
too. Coughing. But anyway, go ahead.
So anyway, I had this encounter on one of my YouTube videos. This woman was definitely implementing the Dillahunty Dodge a lot, but because she never wanted to address any of the questions I was giving her. But I was trying to talk about the uniformity of nature and how using the presuppositional argument that they cannot. They have to have faith in induction. They have faith in induction.
Right.
They have no proof for it, no evidence that that will come true. And then she would make the connection that, well, since I believe in miracles, then therefore I also do not have any evidence for the uniformity of nature, since water can turn into wine at any moment. And I
Who
think
says it can turn into wine? Water can turn into wine at any moment. Because when it did occur, it occurred at the command of Christ at a specific moment. So that's not a correct assertion.
Right. Yeah, that's one thing that I pointed out. It just seemed to me that she was conflating the issues, because Scripture says that God will sustain His creation, and miracles do not counteract that promise that God gave us.
Yeah, and also I've addressed this argument before. Is that they'll say, well, if you believe in miracles, that God can do this, then you can't trust in the uniformity of nature either. And I'll say, well, there's no reason to say that miracles mean there's no uniformity of nature. And the reason is because how do you know that God is not using aspects of nature that we don't know, that we then categorize as being miraculous, when they're not? They're just things that God has embedded in creation that we haven't discovered yet and He has control of. There's no reason to say that miracles are a violation of the natural realm. It's just something we perceive as being unusual and out of the ordinary. It doesn't mean it's impossible, and it has no effect on the uniformity of nature argument from the Christian perspective.
Yeah. So would that fall under any specific fallacy then?
Yeah, the fallacy of lamoism. No, I'm trying to think. I'm not an expert in this kind of stuff, but what would that be? It might be. I'm thinking category mistake is a possibility, but I don't know. Maybe fallacy of division. No, I don't think so. I don't know. That's a good one. That's parts of it.
Yeah, that's why I gave it up to you. So.
Yeah, it's. I think it might
Do
even
you
be.
think it could be a
dilemma.
fallacy of? Could it be a fallacy of composition?
Could be composition. What's true of part is true of the whole, but it's like a blending of several things. I'm thinking false dilemma also, in that you can't believe in the uniformity of nature because of miracles, like that miracles are automatically a violation of nature. But that might even be a straw man argument, because it doesn't necessitate that that's what that is, and it might also be a false dilemma in that it's only these two options: violation or non-violation. And that would be, I don't know. It's hard.
So it could be, and the Meow's cat saying, yeah, a third option, which would make it, a fallacy of the excluded middle, that there could be a third option there. And maybe what we should have started with, Matt, is, and then I know that Joshua had a question about the Dillahunty Dodge. So, but before we get to that, maybe what we should have started with is this: how do we recognize a valid argument? I mean, so in logic, we talk about valid arguments, and whether if a statement or an argument is logically valid, because you can have a statement that is a valid argument, but it still is not a correct one. If the premise, the argument works out fine, but the premise could be faulty.
Right.
So why don't we first talk? What is a valid argument? What makes it valid?
It's been a while since I've gone over this. Let me kind of cheat and go to the web, because there are lots of good articles on this. And I'm looking at the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, because you have to have validity and soundness. There are two aspects for truth values to be established using logic. Let's see. Either Elizabeth owns a Honda or she owns a Saturn. Elizabeth does not own a Honda, therefore Elizabeth owns a Saturn. That there's logic in that, but it's not a sound argument. Or maybe it's, I think it's.
Well, that would be a logically valid argument, because it fits but it's not sound, because the original premise is that she either owns this or that, but there's nothing that forces that to be the case. So you end up with the argument within itself. How we'd end up doing this is say, if A, right? A in this case, her premise is she either owns one of either Saturn or, I forget which one it was, but say VW. So she either owns a Saturn or a VW. If she doesn't own one, then logically it's valid to say she owns the other. But what brings in the soundness is whether the premise itself is correct.
Right. The premise in that example is it might be a false dichotomy. We have Honda or Saturn. It could be that it's a Dodge or a Ford. So we don't know. And the conditions, it could be sound and valid given more information, but since it's not available, we can't say. So on that same website, here's a good example of an argument that's valid and sound. No felons are eligible voters. Some professional athletes are felons, therefore some professional athletes are not eligible voters. So that's sound or valid and sound. It follows logically, and it's also the logical conclusions are also sound in that they are true. The conclusion is in itself true and requires truth values in it. So that's what it has to do with validity and soundness.
All right, so Joshua, you had if you want to unmute yourself, then you can ask. You had some questions regarding the Dillahunty Dodge and a red herring, and with that, Matt, you may want to define what red herring is after he asks the question.
Hey, Matt.
Okay.
How you doing, man?
All right.
I was thinking it might be the Dillahunty Dodge might be some form of a red herring because it's kind of, you know, the red herring being like this smelly fish that's used to kind of distract from the initial argument. I guess it's, now that I think about it, it might not be, but I think the Meow's cat said he was like Matt Dillahunty makes the middle. He includes the excluded middle.
Well, I would just say it's just a dodge. It's an avoidance of a commitment. I don't think it's a logical fallacy because there's no premise A, B, and a conclusion. It's just the guy just wants to hide and not commit, so it can't be cross-examined. We just call it the Dillahunty Dodge. I wouldn't say it's a logical fallacy. You know, not in a strict sense. Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. I wouldn't either say it's a
behavior. So I don't think a behavior is subject to a logical syllogism like that. It's just a behavior. You know, I'm not going to make a commitment. You make yours, and I'll examine yours. You know.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
That's what he does.
But I guess that like begs the question of like if someone needs to stick to a specific position to be logically sound, like you know what I mean? Like could someone jump? I guess not within the argument, but could someone just say like, oh, I just don't have a position? You know, I don't know. But what define this? You know, because technically, I guess that's what makes it not a fallacy because they're not being illogical. But I'm like, is that more cowardice than it is a fallacy, or?
I think it's more depravity.
Depravity.
I'm serious. I think it's. I'm not just being name calling. I think it's total depravity. It's a manifestation of sin on the mind, the noetic effect of sin on the mind and the heart. And the heart's desperately wicked and deceitful, and so people will do various things in order to hold on to their. I'm just going to call it what I believe it is: their idolatrous positions of their own superiority to be able to determine truth and moral truths. And that's what I think it is. And it's a manifestation of the sin nature. And so people who will manifest that in different ways, such as Matt Dillahunty and others that will deny certain things or just choose not to affirm anything so that they don't have to be cross-examined. They can hide in their darkness. That's what I believe.
Yeah. No, and I think I totally agree. I think that's funny. I totally agree, like total depravity. But I think Sai was saying that in his debate with Dillahunty, and he was saying like something about Matt not holding to logic, and well, his Sai's argument is just that it's either Jesus Christ or absurdity, and I think he gets people everywhere when he does this. He's like, starting to watch his debates. He's one of the best I've seen to contend for the Christian faith. Because he just puts it out there where Matt kind of holds to logic, but then he doesn't hold to logic, but then he holds to logic, but then he doesn't.
Right.
So he doesn't.
I've heard that called the taxi cab fallacy. In and out of the taxi cab. As you're going along, you get in and out, so that you're holding to a certain worldview until it's inconvenient. You jump out, you get a different worldview, get back in. And I don't know if that's correct, but it's called. I've heard that. Yeah, people do that. Like atheists will do it regularly. Yeah. They'll try and hold an atheist worldview, but then in order to argue, they have to, without realizing it, adopt a Christian worldview in the logical absolutes, transcendental values of them, and things like that, and then get back into their atheistic cab and keep going. So I've heard that called the taxi cab fallacy. I don't know if that's correct or not.
I like that. No, that makes a lot of because
I've heard that too. Yeah, I've heard that too.
Wow. Oh, and Matt, I was going to ask you, I guess, why. I've heard this argument by Sai and by other Christians as well, but why is it Jesus Christ or absurdity? Not that I don't think that, but I guess breaking down Sai's argument, it was the first time I watched it, it was way over my head. I was like, wow, I had to break it down. But I guess could you concisely summarize what he is saying when he says that why not holding to the Christian worldview doesn't make you illogical because you have to use logic presupposing God, but
Right. Yeah. The only worldview that can make sense of things is the Christian worldview. And so, real basically, the laws of logic are conceptualizations, they're abstractions. Logic is a process of the mind. Socrates was, all men are mortal. Socrates was a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. Now, that that syllogism is true. It's valid and it's sound. Well, in order for people to have the ability to argue, and we'll just use the issue of logic, well, certain things have to be in place in order to have an argument. For example, you have to be able to have a brain. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to, understand certain logical principles. Okay, so in doing so, you're presupposing certain values. You're presupposing certain truths. So in this case, you're presupposing a law of identity. Something is what it is, and it's not what it's not. Presupposing the law of non-contradiction, the second law of logic. Presupposing that statements are either true or false, the law of excluded middle, and things like that. So what they're doing is assuming the validity of the universality of the laws of logic, but they can't account for them from their worldview, because the laws of logic are universal and they're not dependent upon your mind or my mind. Our minds are different. We may disagree on something. And so they're not the product of human minds, but yet they are of the mind by nature. That's what logic is. That's the laws of logic are by nature conceptual. They're abstractions. And so abstractions require a mind. And so only in the Christian worldview can we account for the uniformity of nature, can we account for moral absolutes, and in particular in this discussion here, we can account for the necessary preconditions for intelligibility. The necessary precondition is the foundation upon which the laws of logic themselves rest. The precondition is God, because only with the universal mind that God is can we then trust in the universality of the laws of logic, and that their truth value works. Where from the atheist perspective, they cannot offer anything that's sound and valid. They always make mistakes. They usually go into the phallic composition and conflation, begging the question, and various things as they try and educate. So does that help?
Yeah, no, that does help a lot. And one thing that I realized is I think they go back to, eventually when you ask questions like, why is that, they go back to, oh, it is because it is. And we don't have any better explanation. And that's, I forget what that fallacy is called, but Matt Dillahunty loves to use that on other people. But then Sai calls him out when he uses it, and he's like, no, but that doesn't count. I forget what it is. It's like, we don't have a better explanation.
Sure. All atheists, I can ask them, well, why are the laws of logic in place? Why are they there? Well, they just are. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what they have to say. And I've gotten to that place many times. They'll say, okay, so then you just say they just are. They're just axiomatic truths that we discover. We don't invent them, because if they were invented of human minds, they wouldn't be axiomatic. They'd be the product of human minds and human chemistry. And you wouldn't be able to know if they're true or not. So they're outside of ourselves. We discovered them. And you just say that they just are. Well, then God just is. So I use your same logic.
Right. Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah, I guess that's why. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Andrew. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say the fallacy you were referring to is called begging the question, and what we have with that is when you talk about Sai's argument, it's actually not original with Sai. Sai's kind of, I'm saying water it down. I don't mean that he watered it down in the sense that he made it a lot easier for people to understand. Really, a lot of this comes from Van Til. Bonson made Van Til a little bit easier to understand. Sai made Bonson a little easier to understand. Okay. But what you have is the argument basically is, think about in an atheistic worldview where they say there is no God, everything is just chemical reactions. If that's the case, then their own argument defeats itself, because there's no way that they could make an argument. That's why it's absurd. It's absurd because if you remove God, then you cannot even explain your ability to have a discussion, because it requires immaterial, absolute, universal things like truth, knowledge, laws of logic. When we talk about right and wrong, that requires morality. All these things require God. And this is why, if you ever read, in the Bible it says, the fool says in his heart there is no God. And I think the reason many people misunderstand to think the Bible's calling people fools. Well, in a sense, God is, because to deny God requires God. You have to use your God-given ability to reason to deny the God that gave you an ability to reason. That's foolishness. And that's why it's called absurd. Because if you deny God, you're denying the very thing that's required for you to be able to deny something.
Right. And I think that I guess like uniformity in nature and logic being two different things, because I see uniformity in nature all the time. I mean, obviously everybody does, but I guess I'm a studying electrical engineer, so I'm almost so when we study things like electromagnetic theory and we look at certain laws and like the different Maxwell's equations that we can describe natural phenomena with, I guess we start with. It's funny to think that like everybody would start with God. It's not funny, but it's interesting to think that everybody would start with God to even like use induction to say, okay, well this equation is going to work and this law is going to hold still. This is going to hold for the next time and this is going to hold for the next time. But is there a reason to think that in any type of situation that we would not have logic, but we'd have uniformity in nature? Or are the two kind of dependent upon each other in any way? If that question even makes sense.
Yes, they are. Uniformity of nature is a concept. We're saying that nature behaves the same way everywhere. Well, how do you know that? Well, because you have to use logic to deduce that. You have to say it's basically we see it's induction. We see that the paper burns at this rate in Europe. We see the paper burns at this rate in South America, and in the space station it burns at this rate we can calculate. So therefore, in these little bitty instances, we determine that it will burn the same rate everywhere. It's called the uniformity of nature. I think Hume destroyed that, and that all it is educated guessing, and that's all it is. So the uniformity of nature, it can't exist rationally and be proven in an atheistic worldview. But if we presuppose God's existence, then we can count on the uniformity of nature, because then we can say God, as the Bible says, who holds all things together by the exertion of his will. Then we can see that he does it the same way because he's ubiquitous and covers the universe, and therefore we can count on the uniformity of nature, which was a necessary precondition for the development of science, believe it or not.
Yeah.
That's where science came from.
Yeah.
All right. So someone with the name Glory Be to Christ has a question for you, Matt, that is in the chat. But if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, this looks like it's going to be a good one for you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I guess my question is, well, I've heard a lot from those who oppose the Christian worldview that they try to claim that they try to put God on the same level with like some sort of mythological creatures such as the Tooth Fairy or Santa Claus or anything of that sort, and they try to claim that because we can't prove the existence of those creatures, we can't prove the existence of God either. So what kind of fallacy would that fall under, and
guilt by
how could
association.
someone respond to that?
That's guilt by association. You see, Santa Claus is a myth, the Easter Bunny is a myth, and they just say Jesus is a myth. Well, how do they know? For one thing, they're trying to say because they're myths, and then they associate Jesus with them, it's guilt by association, that he's also a myth. But it's a fallacy. By the nature of what it is, it's a fallacy. For them to compare Jesus to, say, Santa Claus, and I've had atheists do this with me, and I've said, okay, what justifies the comparison? You've made a comparison, so what justifies it as being the right comparison? If it's just your opinion, well then why do you have that opinion? If you want to say that Jesus is a myth, why would you say that? Since we have eyewitness accounts written in the New Testament documents, so we get into the reliability of the scriptures and another argument. So ask them to demonstrate why the comparison is a proper comparison. Okay.
Thank you very much for that answer. I really appreciate it.
All right, so Matt, we want to go back to some of the ones on your website. The first one that you have listed as a logical fallacy is the ad hominem. Now that one is, I think, often misunderstood. Could you define what the ad hominem properly is, give some examples, and then explain some ways that if we, to not only recognize it, but how to respond if we see someone doing that?
Sure. Yeah, ad hominem attack, ad is Latin ad hominem, to the man, or against the man. It's trying to invalidate an argument by attacking the individual. So on my website I say, you know, you're so stupid, your argument couldn't possibly be true. Well, that's an attack of the individual to say that the argument that they're presenting is not true because of a lack of equality or ability within them. And so people have said to me, I'll be arguing Calvinism. They'll say, Matt, you're such an arrogant idiot that I can't listen to your arguments about Calvinism. And my response is, well, you're right. I am arrogant and I am an idiot, but that doesn't mean the arguments are not sound. Could you attack the arguments instead of me? So when people generally will attack me, for example, I just, yeah, you're right. I am a sinner. You know, I don't have any problems with it. I won't. There's certain ones I won't accept. You know, someone called me a child molester. I'll say, nope, that's never been and never will be. But you know, you're arrogant, you're foolish, you're stupid. Yeah, I'll lay claim to those. But what has that got to do with the validity of the argument? And so by attacking me, or you, or another individual, in order to say that the argument can't occur, can't be true, is a bad one. And it's similar to the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy, the source of the information is bad, so therefore the information or the argument's bad.
So someone just calling you names is not an ad hominem, correct?
Just insulting.
They're just insulting, and because that's how a lot of people end up using. They say, oh, that's an ad hominem attack. If you're correcting, I mean, I was accused recently when we were teaching through the classes on Jehovah's Witnesses. As we're just going through a class on world religions, someone told me I'm doing an ad hominem attack because I'm explaining what Jehovah's Witnesses believe and then comparing it to the scripture. And I said it wouldn't be an ad hominem if what I'm saying is accurate to what they believe, because I'm not attacking any individual person. It's the organization. But if I'm accurate to what they believe, that's not an ad hominem just because you think it's insulting. And so people do make that mistake as well.
Right. Yes, they do. They do.
Okay, so you have one on an appeal to force. What is that fallacy?
If you don't believe what I'm telling you, bad things are going to happen to you. It's a threat, basically. I've heard Benny Hinn use it, that if you don't stop criticizing him, bad things are going to happen to your family. So instead of him looking at the arguments and the evidence, it's a threat. And so appeal to force is that, basically, Now, the thing is, we Christians will say sometimes, look, if you do not receive Christ, you're going to end up going to hell. People might say, well, that's an appeal to force. At that point, I would say, well, perhaps it is. But it's true because God has told us this. And since He is the terminus, He is the one who answers all questions. He's the one who is the source of all truth. And He has led us to this knowledge. Therefore, I'm just informing you. But some people have called that an appeal to force as well. That it's, God, if you don't believe in God, and He's going to send you to the hell, He's a bully. He's an appeal to force. Well, an appeal to force generally is an invalid methodology of trying to get someone to believe or do something. But when we apply it to the issue of Christ and judgment, it's not an invalid appeal. It is true because it comes from God. So it's not an
Well,
appeal
so
to force in that sense.
would it be fair to say that if the appeal is valid, in other words, on cigarette labels, we put a warning that could fall into the same category? It's an appeal to force. If you smoke these, you're more likely to get this disease, this disease, this
Right.
disease. It is a force that's going to happen if you disobey the warning.
That's right. You know, actually, a good example of appeal to force is Islam, and where they have a sword over your neck. Are you going to convert or die? Appeal
Well,
to
I would
force.
I would also say the Roman Catholic Church, having been raised Jewish, we often would hear the stories of the Inquisitions and whatnot, and how they forced Jewish people to, convert to Catholicism or else. So, all right. So one that we see often, and one of the things I do find funny is the fallacy of equivocation. And if you point out, what I
Mhm.
find out often with a lot of these is that if you point out to someone that they're committing these fallacies, they end up landing on an ad hominem. The ad hominem seems to be the one that people will go to if you keep pointing out that someone's committing these fallacies. But the one of equivocation is one we see especially in the evolution debate.
Mhm.
So could you define what the fallacy of equivocation is, how to recognize it, and how to basically argue if we see it?
Yeah, it's using a term or terms or a sentence structure, a few words that change meaning as you're using them. There's different ways to do that. On my website, I have a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Therefore, a bird is worth more than President Bush. Where the word bush in the first usage is a plant, and bush in the second usage is a human being. Another example is something that's rather common in attacking the deity of Christ and the doctrine of the Trinity, and it's Jesus is God, God is a Trinity, therefore Jesus is a Trinity. And so that's a fallacy of equivocation as well. So Jesus is God. When we say Jesus is God, we're saying he's God in the sense of being divine. And when we say God is a Trinity, we're saying the term God in the sense of the number of persons. So it's not divinity in that sense, it's the number of persons. And so the meaning of the word changes slightly in this usage. And that's something that, well, I have fun doing it with my wife a lot on purpose. It's a lot of fun. But in arguments, it's not something we want to do. You want to be as clear as possible. The way to get around this is to be more precise in your language and your definitions. So when you're talking to Mormons, for example, when they say there's only one God, well, there's an equivocation that goes on in the sense that when they say one God, they mean one of many. Where we say one God, it means there's only one God, period. And so in order to avoid equivocating and to have a confusion of what the terms actually mean, then again, I would say we as Christians believe there's only one God in all places and all times and all existence, that there was never one created before, never one created after. I literally will talk like that with them in order to fine-tune what the phrase is I'm using, and then that avoids equivocation. And that's what I recommend people do if they want to get away from that, is to be precise in their language, and equivocation will be minimized.
Okay, so we see this right often with people that discuss evolution as well, where they equivocate on really two different definitions of evolution:
Right.
special and general, or what we
Right.
often hear as
Micro,
micro and
macro.
macro.
Right.
So explain that one, because that's one that we often come up with as Christians, that we hear with people that will, argue, well, if you believe in creation, well, then they say you're an idiot, which is the ad hominem. But when they say evolution, I mean, do you believe, Matt, in evolution?
Well, what do you mean by evolution? See, that's my responding question. Because I've had people tell me that, and I'll say, you did define that term. It has so many meanings that I have to be non-committal until I understand what definition you're going after. So do I believe in microevolution? Absolutely. I believe that our species do evolve and do adapt physically to our environment. I do believe that. I believe that that's the case. I honestly do. And I believe that they are capable of doing that because God put the genetic information in various species so that adaptation is possible. However, in microevolutionary processes, usually what happens here is a reduction of the gene pool. And what I'll illustrate this is, let me clear my throat here. Hold on one sec.
You're still muted, Matt. Or am I? Matt, you're on mute. Wonder if Matt's Matt's battery in his headset may have gone. I'm not sure. We can hear his lips, or we can see, those who are watching can see his lips moving, but the beautiful thing is we cannot hear him, which is a wonderful thing. And you can't see him go yee, cringing as I say that. So Matt's going to play with his microphone, his headset, while when we hear him again, we'll switch over to him. But let me define how some of that is. I mean, what you saw Matt do is, when you have a fallacy of equivocation, the thing to do is to ask the person, what do you mean by that? The reason for that is ask for the definition of the terms. If the person can't define the term, if they refuse, well, that becomes a problem. Let me add Matt back into the broadcast. All right, Matt, you're back in if you want to try and unmute yourself.
All right, how's that? Can you hear
There,
me?
we can hear you.
I have no clue what was happening. It was not the red, when you click your mute button at the top, it goes red. It wouldn't do anything when I clicked it. And when I turned the video off, it wouldn't do anything. So reloaded, here we are.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to continue?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, so a species of birds gets blown off course by a storm onto a newly developed island. They're the only birds on the island, let's just say. And they have, let's just say, 1,000 units of genetic information between all the species set, a few hundred birds. Well, they have a certain size of bill and a certain strength of bill. And the plants that grow on the island, they're able to crack the nuts and eat the seeds and have no problem surviving. And let's just say that for whatever reason, there's a climate change, and the nuts that are growing are harder to crack. So only those birds born with large bills, larger, stronger bills, so to speak, would be able to crack those things open and to eat and survive. So what happens to the information, genetic information, that materializes in the form of a small-beaked bird? The small-beaked bird cannot survive, and therefore his genetics is not passed on. So whenever a small-beaked bird manifests, he's removed from the gene pool. And as long as this drought or whatever it is, this condition stays, then what will happen is, in that genetic pool, that unit of information that supplies a small beak will eventually be wiped out, so that the adaptation occurs and there is no small-beaked birds anymore. That's the reduction of information genetically. That's microevolution. Macroevolution is through various mutational forms, copying errors, etc. New highly complex information structures are developed, and in them new species are developed, new abilities are developed, etc. So macro is, in a sense, an increase of genetic information, where micro is a reduction of genetic information. It's flying spaghetti monster. I'd love to address that one.
Yeah, and we should. I mean, so and before we do it, just real quick, and I'm going to add that person in. The thing though with that is to recognize that when we say we believe in evolution, and we're talking, as you said, micro or special, we're discussing the fact that we believe in genetics. That's real science. That is dealing with DNA. That's something that we can test and check. But then what they do is really a bait and switch with this in the fallacy of equivocation of using the word evolution to talk about genetics. And if you ever talk with anyone on evolution, you will always see when they have to give proof for their position, they're always going to genetics. They're always going to special evolution, or what's called microevolution. But then what they're arguing for is the other, which is macroevolution, which they don't have evidence for. But they're making the case that, well, if one's true, the other is true. And that then gets into a different kind of fallacy, actually one that we mentioned earlier, really the fallacy of composition. You know, part of it's true, but it doesn't mean the whole, and then so they argue that that's for the whole because they're using the word differently. So this can be one of two fallacies. It's either the fallacy of equivocation because they're using the word evolution two different ways. Really, there's two different forms of discussion in that. Or they're really doing a fallacy of composition because the part of evolution is true when they use the one word to mean both. Part of it's true, but it doesn't mean the whole thing is true. So, JRC99 US, you had a question. You had a couple questions actually. So I wanted to bring you in. If you can unmute yourself, you can ask your question regarding the flying spaghetti monster, and you had some others as well. So go for it.
Yes, am I on?
Yes.
All right, just wanted to make sure. Nice to see you again, Mr. Slick. It's been a while. I actually got to chat with you about, I think, a couple months ago. But I think my question is when it comes to atheists who use the comparison that God is, or for example, they'll say that because we can't disprove the flying spaghetti monster or the invisible pink unicorn, for example,
Sorry.
and therefore they must exist. I mean, I saw the debate with you and Matt Dillahunty where he said that magical fairies can't be disproven, so therefore they exist. And I'm wondering, would this actually be using maybe the fallacy of equivocation by thinking that because the atheist views the idea or the being of God as ridiculous, that they would use something comparably ridiculous to make a quote-unquote point? Would that be correct?
Yeah, we discussed this earlier. They're just making an assertion and they're drawing a comparison, guilty by association. The flying spaghetti monster is ridiculous, and we're going to put God in the same category. Well, the question is, what justifies them putting God in the same category? It is a serious question because they're making an assertion here. They're equating them. What validates them to do that? That's what I would do. As far as flying spaghetti monster goes, I've talked to atheists about this. I said, wait a minute, wait. Let me get this straight. So here we are discussing logic, discussing evidences for God, and you introduce a flying spaghetti monster.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what you know. How does spaghetti fly? And are you saying it's sentient since it's a monster, or is it not sentient? I mean, I'm curious. Let's discuss this flying spaghetti monster thing with you because I want to know why atheists bring up the flying spaghetti monster. Can you explain more how that works? I ask them to explain the flying spaghetti monster to me, and when they do invisible pink unicorn, I go, wait a minute. If it's invisible, how can it be pink?
Yeah.
What are you guys offering me? And I say, look, I'm talking to you using logic. You guys bring up ridiculous stuff which you can't validate at all. You just make something up and then you equate God with it according to what you are doing. So you're making an assertion, a very bold one. Validate that your assertion is the right one, that the comparison is proper.
Exactly, and that's what but I was also wondering if maybe that would actually be as well as a fallacy of equivocation to think that if they could label something as ridiculous, and then come up with something equally ridiculous, would you think that would be the same way or not?
No, not equivocation because a term is not changing its meaning. Okay.
Okay.
It might be, something akin to false dilemma. It's either flying spaghetti monster or God. I don't know if that's really accurate. But what they're doing, in a very real sense, is begging the question: they are assuming that the comparison is the right one to begin with. Now, they've not validated it. They're just begging the question. They're assuming that God is on the same level as whatever a flying spaghetti monster is. Which, what is that? Do they lack belief in that?
Well, and you'll also hear it worded, Matt, as Vincent's saying in the chat. You know, the magic man in the sky, an invisible sugar daddy. You know, he has one here, the ghost that never lies.
Right, those are just insulting ways or demeaning ways. That doesn't have any effect on the validity of the truth.
So Stephen is asking, is this a clear straw man argument?
Well, I don't know. You know, the ghost that never lies, that's a Holy Ghost. That's correct. It's good theology, so I wouldn't have a problem with that one. Magic man in the sky, at that point, I just say, what do you mean by magic? What do you mean? Like the resurrection of Christ, is that magic? Is that what you're saying? See, guys, all you got to do with them when they make these statements is just analyze the statements and just ask them to validate their statements. Basically, that's it, and they'll come unglued. That's it.
Okay, so you mentioned about valid statements. Earlier, I want to ask you about this too, because Matt, you have like 35 years experience doing this. So a lot of times you say things because you're very familiar with it, and you just skip over explaining some of the things that for new people who maybe this might be the first time they're hearing some of this stuff, we want to deal with. You mentioned the word syllogism. Can you explain what is a syllogism for folks, and what, when we talk about like a premise, what are these things?
A syllogism is a set of statements where there are two premises and a conclusion. That's what a classic syllogism is. So here's an example of a syllogism. Two statements. All men are mortal. That's one statement. Socrates was a man. That's a second statement. The conclusion now is, therefore, Socrates is mortal. That's a syllogism. Two premises, a conclusion based on the premises. And that's what a syllogism is. Real simple. Okay? And it also involves deductive reasoning too. But we call it a syllogism. Two main premises and a conclusion. And it's logic. That one I gave you is both valid and sound. It's logically consistent, and it's also sound in that it's a true statement. So the conclusion's true. So, when back to this issue of are syllogisms mainly used in formal logic? I don't know. I haven't studied formal logic to know. But when they say flying spaghetti monster, when they say, "Oh, you big sugar daddy in the sky," I'll say, "Look, what do you mean by these statements? What do you mean sugar daddy? What do you mean? What are you equating God, the creator of the universe, with a sugar daddy that someone has sex with in order to get things? Is that what you're saying? Because that's kind of kinky. What are you saying?" There's all kinds of ways to deal with what they're saying by taking their statements and working with them. Like I said, flying spaghetti monster, an invisible pink unicorn, the sugar daddy, whatever it is. Magic man in the sky. What do you mean by magic? What are you asserting? Because when they say the magic man in the sky, whatever, I always say, why is it the atheists are the first ones to bring up magic? I'm having a discussion, and they are the ones who they bring up magic first. Why is that? Is it because their arguments have run out? And I'll talk to them like that. I'll say, if you want to have a discussion with me, please, let's forego magic. Let's forego invisible pink unicorns, which is a non sequitur. Let's get down to the facts and discuss things instead of being obstreperous and obtuse.
All right. So, trying to see, we have someone here. I'm going to add him, Polymath. He wants to discuss the topic of objective morality. We've been focusing really on logical fallacies, but let him come in and let's discuss this for a little bit, and if we need to, we'll get back to logical fallacies. So go ahead, Polly. You can unmute yourself anytime.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Good evening, or whatever time it is for you. Greetings. So I'm just curious, I guess, about your thoughts on objective morality, because one of the things I've been thinking about is how nuanced of an issue it can be depending on your perspective. And um, one of the things I ask people, because Hitler tends to come up in these sorts of conversations, is that if Hitler had won the war, do you not think that people would try to justify what he did in retrospect?
Of course, people would try and justify. Would all people do it? Would some of the people do it? Of course, people would. That's human nature. When you have millions and millions of people,
Yeah.
people are going to do it. Two people is, by definition, people.
Yes.
So, it's going to happen.
Right, but do you think that that would influence your perspective on whether or not it was right to do that?
It might. Depends on what they were arguing. Without more specifics, it could make an educated comment. But when you say influence, well, what does that mean? You mean influence towards what they believe, or influence in that I react to it? See, if you and I were standing in a room, I could influence you by taking my hand and swinging it next to your face, and then you blink. I've influenced you.
No,
and
but
there's different kinds of terms here.
No, I'm talking about would it influence your perspective towards from what it is now towards maybe what they might believe?
I don't know, because you're talking a very hypothetical situation.
Okay.
And,
okay.
Where there's specifics that have to be worked out. So, I really can't make too much of a comment on that.
Can I give you a real world situation?
Okay. By the way, are you an atheist? We talked before. I just don't remember.
Yeah, we have. I'm atheist.
Okay.
So a few months ago, it was the 70th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we still, honor President Truman. In fact, I think he's on some coins. I think he's on the dime, actually. But yet he was the one who authorized he was the one who authorized for Japan and for those two cities in Japan to be hit with nuclear weapons, and yet there are people even today who still think that that was justified. Now, was that the objectively moral thing to do?
Well, you're an atheist. You don't have any objective morals.
But I'm asking you because my view is that it's a lot more nuanced than that. But I'm wondering what your view is on that particular situation.
I would say that if it's going to end the war faster and cause less suffering and save more lives, then do it.
But see, there are Christians who would disagree with you on that particular issue.
Who gives a flying rip what they're going to say? You're asking me right now. If you want to set me, hold on. If you want to set me against Christians who aren't in the room, who hypothetically you say would disagree with me, that's
It's not a hypothetical. There are Christians who disagree with you, and the point I'm bringing that up because
I don't care.
Okay, but the reason I'm bringing that up is because how come it's not so clear? Because if you would think that if it was...
What's not so clear?
The reason it's not so clear, because I would be one that would disagree with Matt, the reason it's not so clear...
You're breaking it really bad, Andrew. Can't understand you.
Okay.
But let me work with him. I'm trying to understand what he's saying here. What's the it that you're talking about?
Whether or not this was objectively moral.
Objectively moral?
Yeah, from your perspective, even from a Christian's perspective, because they are influenced, or rather, you already have a particular view on this, and they have their own view on this, and they use scripture to justify it.
Okay. What are you trying to do? What's your point?
My point is that this whole idea of objective morality is not as clear-cut as you're making it sound.
Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is.
But why would it not be clear-cut if it's absolute and objective from God?
It's the issue.
Andrew, let me work with them. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, Paulie. Say that again.
Why wouldn't it be so clear-cut if it's so absolute and objective and it comes from God?
Because God does not give us a clear answer to every single situation in every place, every minute, all over the planet.
So why is it that you are against, say, you are against homosexuality, gay marriage, right?
Yes, I'm against that which is against God's revelation and truth.
Okay, so you have no qualms about that, and you instantly say that that is objectively immoral.
Yes.
But yet, when it comes to whether it was objectively moral to nuclear bomb 2 cities, you say that that issue is much more complicated than the issue of gay marriage.
It is, because God says homosexuality is a sin. It's very clear. That's it. But the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which I approve of, because it ended the war sooner, and statistically, the estimates is saved 1 million lives, and that's just on the American side. Now, you're an atheist.
I would disagree with you on that.
Well, you can disagree all you want. Okay, that's fine. But the thing is, don't you believe that you want to reduce harm?
Well, see, the thing is, I have a...
I'm asking you some questions now. Don't
Yes.
you believe that you want to reduce harm? Well, if the bomb reduces harm by ending the war quicker, then aren't you for it?
I don't believe it did reduce harm. I think
If it did, if it ended, let me ask you, if it would end the war sooner and save 1 million lives, then morally shouldn't it be dropped on them?
yes, but I don't believe that that's
Okay.
the case.
Okay, so then, you see, you agree with me then. I believe it did end the war. You would agree with my reasoning then, that it saved lives. You just don't think it did, but you agree with my reasoning. So we're in the same boat, aren't we?
But you would agree with my the reasoning of someone who is opposed to you.
If it was not going to reduce casualties, and if it was not going to do that at all, then I wouldn't say do it.
But how is that any different from saying that if God approves of it, like for example, if a homosexual says, well, if God approves of it,
What do you want to discuss, homosexuality or bombing Nagasaki? Which one do you want to discuss?
well, I'm talking about how this is a general case and a general problem for your worldview.
It's no problem.
It's not.
Well, you know,
You're the one with the problem. Hold on, Andrew. Paulie, you're the one with the
some questions that people did want to ask.
You're breaking up so bad we can't understand you, Andrew. I don't know why. Seriously. Paulie, you're the one with the problem.
Why?
Because all you want me to do is argue your moral opinion.
Well, I'm not here to, articulate my particular opinion on objective morality. That's an issue I'm still
I've
trying
already
to figure
given
out.
you. I've already given you an answer about the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and you agreed with me. If it reduces harm, then do it. Okay, and end the war sooner. That's the reason I would say it was justified. You agreed with me.
I agree with you on the condition, on a particular condition. My agreement with you is conditional if it did.
Okay, good. So what's the next topic we want to discuss?
Well, see, the thing is, if you're going to say that it's justified under these sort of conditions, then, I mean, you can say that pretty much about any single thing. I mean, abortion could be justified under certain conditions. So doesn't that sort of lead to a slippery slope that...
You're all over the map here, and you're not being specific.
I'm saying that all your morality is conditional because it relies on the outcome.
No, it doesn't.
You're
No,
saying
it doesn't.
if it reduces...
Polly, I did not say all morals if they reduce a certain such and such. You're not listening clearly. What you're looking for is something to attack. You give me these generalities. I ask you for specifics. I answer one thing on one issue. You agree with me on it, and then you misrepresent what I'm saying. You're trying to justify your atheism. That's all you're trying to do.
Hey,
You're trying
Matt.
to use me to do it. Hold on, Andrew.
Because we've been familiar with Polly before, and since we do have questions that people actually have and not, that they want to talk with, it might be good to get to some of the questions people have. So if you want to wrap this one up.
Give me 5 minutes. I'll show him. Polly, is it always wrong for everyone to torture babies to death merely for their personal pleasure? Is it always wrong for someone to torture babies to death merely for their personal pleasure? Polly? Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't. I mean, it's not saying that he's muted.
Well, maybe the question's too difficult for him. Maybe he's having a problem. But
I've actually gone down this road with him in the question of asking him, is the act of rape always wrong? And he argued that it was always wrong because it does harm to others. And then when I gave a case where no woman was harmed in a rape, he suddenly had trouble. But
what about a woman who's in a coma and she's raped and she never knows it? She's not pregnant.
Yeah, there's a real case where a dentist here in Jersey, 26 women that he had done that with while they were unconscious. But wow. I know that Cat's Meow wanted to get back to some discussion that he had with you, and then JRC had a follow-up question. So, Vincent, if you want to unmute yourself and then go for it.
Yeah, I don't know if it was necessarily things that we had covered in the past, but one thing that actually kind of dovetails nicely with what Polly was discussing, he kind of brought up homosexuality, and I think that's an interesting topic because I've heard a lot of people use kind of an evolutionary morality type thing where it's like, things have evolved to be this way. We see homosexuality in like so many mammal species out there, therefore it can't be wrong, right? Well, that's actually using the naturalistic fallacy. That's saying that it just because, because something is this way, that means that it should be that way or should be done that way. So I wanted to kind of bring that up because like a lot of people will also, to go back to the evolutionary thing, it's saying like a moral code has survival value for the species, so that explains why we have morality. The issue is that might explain why people do that, but not whether or not they should or shouldn't do that. So.
Right. Also, it shoots them in the foot because if they're going to use a naturalistic argument, well, the homosexuality, it occurs in nature. Well, so does eating their young and rape. So I guess that makes it okay too. They say, no, it's not okay. Well, then wait a minute. Why are you picking and choosing which part of nature you want to look at?
Yeah, so you can attack this from multiple angles. One, because it's just a logical fallacy, and two, because if you actually follow it, strictly, then eating your own young is okay. So.
Because it's part of nature to do that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
It's just like, I wish it would stop. Stop thinking badly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And then also, I wanted to bring up another fallacy because I guess brushing on that one, I don't know if there's really any argument against the naturalistic fallacy, and come up with two different ways you can approach it. But another one I wanted to bring up to make sure that I'm approaching this one correctly is the appeal to ignorance. I was actually discussing.
What is that one?
The appeal to ignorance is. Let's see here. It's a
I was having fun.
I got you.
It's one that Matt is very accustomed to.
What was that again?
Yeah, no, I
couldn't help it.
I see it.
And for anyone that's not realizing, that right there was an example.
Yeah,
of an appeal to ignorance.
I was actually taking Matt seriously, and then I realized, oh wait, he was joking. So yeah.
Oh wait, this is Matt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but I was discussing with an atheist. I think if I'm not mistaken, this was while Stephen was in here as well. We were discussing infinites and whether or not the universe is infinite and whatnot. And I pointed out they used the appeal to ignorance because they were saying, well, because no one has proven that the universe, I don't want to misquote them, but essentially it was one of two things because I was going to use this in reverse on them. So I'll explain it in both ways, and one of them was the way that the atheist had presented it. One was that the universe can't be infinite because no one has proven that it is. The other way is, well, the universe is infinite because no one has proven that it isn't, or whatnot. I don't know if I'm explaining that exactly right.
No one's
but
proven it. Yeah, even that's got problems. No one's proven it. You know, all people that know what they've all proven or not proven. Yeah, that he's aware of. No one has is best. At any rate. Yeah.
Yeah, but when I pointed out that they were using the appeal to ignorance, and I actually read out of a book, it's like it's a fallacy of appealing to the unknown. Specifically, it is when a person argues that a claim is probably true simply because it has never been proven false. And they said, well, I didn't say probably, I said possibly. So it's possible that the universe is infinite or isn't infinite because no one has proven that it is, or whatnot. It's essentially the reverse, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole mixture of problems in that. In that they're making assumptions and they don't understand other arguments that would affect that. And to say no one has is a claim that can't be validated. There's just all kinds of problems in that methodology and those kind of statements. They had to be more precise and say that as far as they're aware of, no one has proven that the universe had a beginning, okay, or whatever the argument would be. Now that's something you could work with, Yeah. I always ask them to define their. Sometimes maybe my autism comes into a little bit of play on it. I'll ask people to restate things sometimes because some of the way they say things, I'm like, wait a minute, am I understanding what they're saying? Could you restate it? And that kind of a thing, I would ask them to restate things probably because I think clarification will be necessary as well.
Well, yeah, and we had been having a decently long conversation, and I don't know if the individual was completely understanding what infinite, what the points we were trying to make about, an infinity. If there was an infinite amount of time before this, we would never be able to reach now. And they're like, well, that doesn't make sense. Yes, actually, it does. It follows logically, but yeah, I think we'll again kind of.
Well, there's I got to be careful how I say this. I'm not going to accuse anybody of stupidity. It's just that sometimes you're having a discussion with somebody and they don't know enough to be able to answer competently. And I'm not trying to knock them, because we're all at different levels of learning. Then other times I do suspect that there's an IQ issue that would come into play. And I'm not saying I'm superior, I can understand it, and you can't. But I do think that some arguments require a certain amount of mental agility and capacity. And I think some of them just go over a lot of people's heads because they don't have the ability to understand them. And I'm not knocking people for that. I just think that that's part and parcel of the environment that we argue in sometimes, that it does happen.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I can understand that. And then this will be the last fallacy that I go over, because this is another one that I think that I have an understanding of, but this is the one that I want to make sure that I understand well enough. It's the tu quo que fallacy, or the U2 fallacy. It's appeal to hypocrisy, sometimes also referred to. Now, my understanding of it, and I'll give you an example that I found on YouTube because I think it's appropriate. And let me know if this is a good example so that I know I'm understanding it. The example is, and I'll kind of condense it, but it's a father goes to his son and says, son, I was driving home from work today early, and I drove past your school and I saw you outside smoking. I stopped, I saw you smoke the entire cigarette, and then went back inside. Smoking is bad for you. It can cause cancer. You can get emphysema. It's gonna yellow your teeth. It's gonna, there's a lot of health issues that are really, it's a bad thing for you to be doing. The son turns around and goes, "But wait, Dad, you smoke, so it can't be wrong for me to smoke." And at that point in time, the son has committed the tu quoque fallacy. Even if it's true that the father does smoke, his points about the health concerns are still valid. So it's the fallacy. Because you're doing it, it can't be wrong, or because you're doing it, I can't be wrong in doing so.
Right, that's correct.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure, because I've heard some people say, no, if it's true, it's not a fallacy. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. The points that I've made about, what I'll say is, I've run into atheists who once I've gone through like a presuppositional approach with them, they go, well, sure, this is a problem for me that I can't account for logic, or I can't account for this, that, or the other thing. But you can't either. You too have to gripe with these things because you have to pick up your Bible and look at it. So you're using your senses. So it's like, no. We're not talking about whether this is an issue for my worldview. We're talking about whether this is an issue for your worldview. We haven't even gotten to the point where whether or not this is an issue for mine. We're just discussing yours. So it's again multiple levels of issues that they're kind of running into.
Oh, good for you. Yeah, you're seeing it and you're arguing with them and having to face these issues. Another way of illustrating it, the cigarette thing, is your dad's beating your mom, and so you say, well, I'm going to beat my sister. Why? Because you do it, Dad. It doesn't work. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for the input and letting me share and whatnot, and I'll get out of the way for other people, because I know there's a couple other people who want to talk.
Yeah, well, we had JRC had some fallacies he wanted to bring up, and we'll see if we have time for some more folks after that. But I'm not sure if he's in here anymore. So now I'll scroll up, Matt, and I will try to find what he said and read it to you.
Oh, no, he's here.
Is he? Did I just miss him? Oh, there he is. Okay, go for it. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's okay. I just want to kind of confirm whether these are fallacies or not. I mean, I do have the carm.org logical fallacy page bookmarked everywhere, like from my phone to my computer. But to go back to the new atheist categorization of that atheism is a lack of a belief, since it really is more of a description towards agnosticism, would this be like a fallacy of identification?
That's interesting. It is a kind of leaning towards agnosticism, which still is a subcategory of atheism, but what they're doing is redefining atheism. Atheism used to be positive, not lacking. In other words, they would say there is no God, or they believe there is no God, or they would assert, etc., no evidence for God. It was a positive assertion. It's only after cross-examination of the past few decades that they've retreated into the lack of. Now, the second part of the thing you said, though, it was interesting. You said, say it again. Say it again. You got me thinking.
I'm trying to name these things off the top of my head, or as more of a description than what actually is there.
Yeah.
But
what you said, the last couple things, yeah.
What I was saying was that since, by all definitions, I mean, I've looked at dictionaries, I've looked at philosophical encyclopedias and other philosophical dictionaries on atheism, and they all conclude that it's an assertion that there is no God, and yet the closest thing to it is agnosticism, to say that there's a lack of a belief, meaning that there's no complete substance to actually have a belief. That it almost seems like they're trying to take an identity and use a fallacy of trying to identify themselves as something that they are not truly are. That's what I'm trying to say. I hope that made sense.
Kind of. I've thought about that. I think I know what you're getting at. I've wondered about that too. They're identifying themselves as something that isn't.
Yes.
It's a whole other. Yeah, I've talked to atheists about that. So what are you? I have a lack of belief. So you identify yourself with a lack?
Yeah, exactly. And from what I gather, and this is from my own perspective, is that usually a lack is not a complete absence, that there is still some substance, but you have no definitive evidence to push you towards a total belief.
That's right. Now, one of the things I'll do is I'll ask people, do you behave based on what you believe or what you don't believe in?
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, I think what I'm trying to do is trying to make sure to see if there's something simpler to describe it. Because a lot of times when I get into atheists, especially here on YouTube, and we know how YouTube atheists are, that a lot of times through even a simplistic explanation of saying like, well, you can't really say that you have a belief and a lack of a belief at the same time.
Right.
Could that be like saying, well, that would be considered a fallacy, and if it is, what would that fallacy be?
Well, this fallacy of just self-contradiction. They can't hold, opposing views. It violates LNC. Law of non-contradiction just violates it. You can't have well, what it is. I think, though, that we behave based on what we believe, and I think that's important at this point to interject that into a discussion with them, because if they're going to say they lack belief in God, then are they behaving based on a lack of belief or a belief? And their actions reveal their beliefs, and their actions are one of denial of God. Therefore, they have a positive denial of God. They only hold to the moniker of lack of belief in order to avoid cross-examination and just hide underneath the Dillahunty Dodge umbrella.
Exactly, and that's what I was kind of thinking, where it almost seems like it's almost kind of like a place of safety to save them from, like, for example, the burden of proof. So, but yeah, like I said, I was just trying to see if there's any way to describe it as a fallacy itself.
Yeah, I don't know. Take a logician who's far more intelligent than I am and educated on this. I just know the basics of the fallacies and can identify them on the fly for the most part. But we get into some of these nuances that are kind of bleeding between one edge of one fallacy than another and another. There's probably names for these things more precisely.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. But anyway, so okay, well, thank you for your time. That's all the questions I had, and you guys have a good rest of the evening.
Yeah, I like that idea of equating lack of belief with a type of agnosticism. I think that's good. Good connection there. I haven't really thought of that before, but I think it's good.
All right. So just a quick call out to those in the chat room to see if there's any that are in the chat that have a question on any logical fallacies that they would want to bring up with Matt. Now would be a good time. If we are getting close to, we got about 8 minutes left in the show before we go out off air. The one difficulty tonight will be that since we don't have Mixler, when we go off air, it's only going to be those who are here in the chat room, or sorry, here in the room that would be able to dialogue. So, and Google limits us to 10 people. So, with that, we're going to end up when we go off air. Sorry for those who like to listen to the off-air portion on Mixler, because that's not going to be able to be done today. But we do have permission to go a little bit longer if there's some more questions. So, and Matt, if there's anything that you're seeing in the chat room, anyone that you want to dialogue with that you want us to add in, just let me know. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it.
I wasn't paying attention. Let's see. But, if they want to get on and just start asking stuff, that's fine too.
Wait, are you admitting, Matt, that you were not being ADHD or ADD, and you were actually concentrating on one thing at one time?
No, I was looking at the text which on Google Analytics. I was checking that out, and I was also getting up the article, "Is it always wrong for anyone to torture babies if that's money for their personal pleasure?" which I've written on Karm, which deals with objective morals. But I'd like to see an atheist try and refute that.
For folks that don't know you, Matt, you if you really want to drive Matt crazy, try to get him to stick to one thing at one time and not be distracted by anything else.
Yeah, I got oars in the water all the time until I watch TV and I shut down.
All right, so Vincent, you wanted to discuss another fallacy, so go for it.
Yeah, sure. I know I've been talking a lot, but logical fallacies and having good logic, I think, is or sound logic is something that I think is important. So I've looked into this to a decent amount. I think another one that I don't think you guys discussed this, and correct me if I'm wrong. Did you actually discuss fallacy of reification?
What's that one?
That one is like saying the evidence says this, science says this, nature found a way. It's essentially taking. This is something actually I think that you discussed like 2 weeks ago or something with someone who I don't know if they completely understood what reification was either. It's taking an abstract concept and applying characteristics to it that it doesn't have, like anthropomorphization almost. Yeah, yeah. It's,
Yeah, a fallacy as much as an attempt at clarification a lot of times, because we all anthropomorphize things, sometimes more than others. In areas, God does it in the Bible. You know, I think if a proof is attempted based on an anthropomorphism, depends. You know, you have to weigh each issue. But that's interesting. Reification.
Yeah, and like I've seen people use this as kind of almost a brute force way of trying to say that they're on the right side, and this is coming from both sides. You know, both Christians and believers and unbelievers alike. But I mean, from my perspective, you know, it's the attacks that I remember most. So it's when people are like, you know, evolution figured out a way around these problems. You know, it's kind of a I don't know, like I said, kind of a brute force way of just saying, okay, this is how it happened, and you don't have to question it because evolution found a way, you know, but evolution can't find a way.
You'll see this one when people talk about being on the right side of history. You see that in political realms where people say, well, you want to make sure you're on the right side of history, and that is sort of a little bit of that.
Yeah, and I guess...
So, Matt, there's a couple others here that I think we mentioned red herring. We didn't define it. But there's a couple others. We also mentioned straw man. I don't know that we went into detail on that one. And those are ones that we see a lot.
Right.
So why don't we just hit some of these ones that we see often in discussions. So first, a red herring. What is a red herring? How do we identify it?
Red herring is introducing something not germane to the topic at hand in order to distract or invalidate or argue. So if we're talking, for example, about objective morals, and an atheist were to say to me, but Matt, you got mad at that person 3 weeks ago when you're discussing this, so I really can't trust your argument. You know, that's kind of a red herring. It's not related to the topic. You know, me getting mad at somebody else or something like that. It's a distraction. Think of a red herring as a distraction away from the original topic by introducing something not related to it at all. And that's basically what a red herring is. And people do it all the time. I mean, atheists do it. But the ones who are the worst are Muslims. Muslims, man, they're the worst. You talk to them about something, they are all over the map on all kinds of topics, and they can't focus. I always try and get people to focus. So if I'm talking about a certain specific thing, in fact, I think... what's his name earlier, you know, we're talking about the idea of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then he brought in homosexuality. Well, that's kind of a red herring here, because we're talking about the morality of one specific thing, and he's bringing in something else, which is, if you remember, I went, wait a minute, let's talk about this or this, and, you know, get back to the point, because I think that a lot of atheists, a lot of people do that, offer red herrings. They want to focus on something very, very much. So.
Yeah. And he's trying to deny it's a red herring. All right, so straw man argument. We kind of, did we address this one?
Yeah, we did. We did. Straw man,
okay.
We did. Yep.
So genetic fallacy. I think you mentioned that one briefly.
Right. Genetic fallacy from, you know, Genesis, genetic origins. The origin of the information is questionable, so therefore the information is questionable. The illustration is, I think I said earlier, was a child molester taught my neighbor algebra. So therefore, because he was a child molester, you cannot trust the algebra that he taught him. And that is the genetic fallacy, in that the source of the information is questionable. Therefore, the information isn't, or the argument is doubted. They do that a lot in courts. They try and get the jury to fall for genetic fallacies a lot by discounting the evidence by attacking the individual. And some points that's legit. It depends on what you're doing, but it's something you have to watch out for.
Now, we talked about begging the question, but I don't know if we defined it. What is begging the question?
Assuming the thing to be true that you're trying to prove. And everybody does that. Christians do it. We assume the validity of God's existence in order to prove God's existence. And it's begging the question. Atheists presuppose the validity of the laws of logic in order to argue logically, even about the laws of logic. So we all beg the question. And there's a sense ultimately in, well, I'll get to that in a sec. Begging the question is generally a fallacy of argumentation. For example, the Bible says God exists, so therefore that's how we know God exists. That's but you know, it's begging the question. It's also circular reasoning. Begging the question is a kind of circular reasoning. You're just assuming the thing to be true you're trying to prove, and you're kind of arguing in a circle.
Well, but certain things are axioms that are true, though there's not proof for it. That doesn't necessarily mean it's begging the question.
Right. This is why at this point, when I'm discussing these kind of things with people about, we all beg the question, we all have circular arguments to a point. We have to have a starting point that we assume to be true to begin with, because we all do that. Everybody has a starting point that you assume is true. Otherwise, you can't begin a discussion or an argument. You have to make certain assumptions. The question then at this point becomes, what worldview can account for those assumptions being valid? That's the critical thing. We have atheism, we have theism. Both of those views cannot account for the same thing in the same way, the same phenomena, if they exclude each other. We get into what's called a disjunctive syllogism. If you only have two options to account for something and one is negated, the other one is validated by logical necessity. So both atheism and theism, for example, I'll just say Christianity, atheism and Christianity, we make certain assumptions, but which perspective, which worldview can make sense of those assumptions to begin with? And only the Christian one can do that, and the atheist one cannot.
Okay, so about there's four more that I want to cover. Non sequitur. You have that one on your site.
Yeah, blue sleeps faster than Wednesday is a non sequitur.
So you want to define it? Then you gave an example. Give a definition, how to recognize it, what to do if you see someone using it on you.
Non sequitur is the conclusions don't fall anywhere near the premises as being related. So let's see, which one do I use on there? We know it rained today because I washed my car. Well, that's pretty much true. We all know that. I don't care what you say. We don't need any more bookshelves. As long as the carpet is clean, we're fine. What? What's that got to do with bookshelves? Carpet clean. Non sequiturs, things that don't make sense. They don't have a logical sequence. That's why it's a non sequitur. So one of the ones I use.
So the premise and the conclusion have nothing to do with one another, basically.
Right. Okay. That's why, and I'll say this when I'm talking to atheists who say that the laws of logic are variable and can change. I go, oh, then blue sleeps faster than Wednesday, because what they're saying is actually undermining truth, and I'll give them a non sequitur, so to speak, a statement that itself doesn't make any sense. It can't be true because there's no truth value possible in it.
Okay, then we have special pleading.
Special pleading, applying a standard to yourself that you don't to others, or to others that you don't to yourself. The smoking example. It's okay for me to smoke, but not for you. Why? Because I said so. It's just me. Special pleading. You're making a special case for one party to the exclusion of the other when there's no reason to. It's just an assumption that goes on that you do.
So that's kind of one-on-one with politicians, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Two more. One that you had, the last one that you from your list is poisoning the well.
Poisoning the well. You know, here's an example of poisoning the well. Once my wife and I were having a mild argument, and I said, "But you're wrong." And she said, "No, I'm right." And I said, "You're wrong. I can tell you why. Because you married me." And so whatever you would say after that proves that your judgment is off. That's not exactly a good example of poison in the well, but I like to say
it does prove that her judgment is off.
It does prove that her judgment's off. At least that's
in
the
that
case.
area.
Yeah, she's got some major issues with judgment in men, but hey, um, and so poison the well just says, here's an example. So I'm in Pal Talk. I'm getting ready to come off the mic to answer a question. This happens a lot. So the person I'm having a dialogue and a disagreement with will come up, will be ahead of me and say, now, folks, before I get off the mic, let me just tell you what Matt's going to do. He, in his arrogant self, what he's going to do is start talking about this and this and that and that. And we all know he's wrong because blah, blah, blah. They're poisoning the well. I haven't even gotten to the place yet of giving an argument, and he's already poisoning the minds of the people against me without even hearing me, poisoning the well.
And one I wanted to bring up, because we see this a lot, but I didn't see it in your list, is the appeal to authority. Are you familiar with that one? And if so,
of course. I thought that would be in there. Appeal to the popular.
Oh, okay.
It might be.
You had it as...
Yeah.
Well, the popular is different than authority.
Yeah, it is. Maybe we could put that one in, because that's, how could I miss that one? The appeal to the authority. Just because an authoritative individual says it doesn't mean it's true. That's one of the things that on my radio show, for example, I've got a Master's of Divinity. I've been doing apologetics since 1980. So on January 1st, then I'll start saying, I've been doing it for 36 years. I forgot exactly when, just 1980. So I'll say in the radio show, don't believe me because I have a degree, I'm ordained, and I'm on the radio. Just because you might perceive me as being authority doesn't mean that I'm right. So I try and get people not to appeal to authority as a means of determining truth. However, it is valid to appeal to authority when we're talking about God, because he is the only authority, the ultimate authority, who's our creator. So appealing to authority with him is not a fallacy, because it's a necessary truth.
All right. And so we often see that, Matt, where people will, when it comes into issues of, say, evolution, we've brought that one up, and people will say, well, all the scientists agree in evolution, therefore it must be true.
Yeah, that's a field of appeal to the popular and authority, Majority of scientists. Majority popular, scientist authority.
Yeah, and the issue there is that science is not a consensus. So when people start arguing for consensus to prove their point, they're already in some trouble.
Right. That's what what's his name was doing earlier. Well, other Christians, I don't care what other Christians say. So what? We could disagree. It doesn't make any difference, on what is right or wrong about something. That's another fallacy is that he was trying to do, is setting one person against another. It doesn't address the argument and the validity of the argument. Just because someone disagrees doesn't mean that that person's right, or I'm right, or I'm wrong, or they're wrong. Because people have disagreements doesn't mean that the truth can't be known. Even within atheism, people have disagreements about what atheism really is. Does that mean atheism can't be known what it is? Of course not. So it's a fallacious approach to say, well, other people believe this or that. So what? Who cares? That's not the issue. It's not related to the issue at hand.
Yeah, I mean, and when we get into these discussions, I mean, the reason this is good for folks is you deal with this on a daily basis on your radio show, weekly basis here, where people can see these arguments if they start identifying them, and you are dealing with them, Matt. You are addressing, but people don't always pick up on some of what you're doing, and people will argue, like we had earlier, someone that wants to argue for objective morality, but then when you press him, he wants to say things like murdering babies is always going to be wrong. And so, he argues for an absolute morality, but he wants to believe in an objective morality. And I think part of it being, and let me see if you agree with this, when we deal with people, and this is true for Christians as well as non-Christians, would you think it's fair to say that a lot of people don't think through logically things that they hold to or things that they say?
Everybody without exception does it, except for God, person of Christ. Everybody doesn't think logically through everything that they do. We're all guilty of it at some point.
All right.
Yep.
So with that, I want to try to wrap up. Matt, I do want to give you a chance if there's anything going on at CARM that you want to let folks know about, anything you want to update folks on about CARM.
Well, there's some things we're working on, some ideas. I'll give you the summation of stuff really quickly. Tried to get a video shooting room. It didn't work. Can't afford it. We're going to be changing some SEO stuff, just basic stuff and updates and that kind of thing. That's about it. Nothing major.
Okay. Now I will say, folks, if you're not familiar with CARM, I suggest you go out to carm.org, check out all the articles that are out there. I also want to recommend that you give a call to Matt in his office 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, 5 o'clock Eastern Time, 3 o'clock his time on carm.org. You can find out about those office hours on the radio, CARM Radio, or it's actually Live with Matt Slick, I believe, right? Is the actual name of the program?
Matt Slick Live, which I think is a narcissistic kind of a title, but that's what the radio people said is a good name for the show. It was Faith and Reason, but somebody else had that and asked me to change it. So I said, okay, what are we going to change it to? Hey, how about Matt Slick Live?
So if you want to talk to Matt Slick live on the radio, that'd be a good thing to do. And you can go to carm.org to find out about that number to call in. So for Bible Thumping Wingnut, want to recommend again to you guys, strongly recommend you go out to BibleThumpingWingnut.com, get onto Patreon, start supporting them. The support is coming in, and so that would really help them to be able to put these programs and even more. There's some new equipment that they want to be able to purchase, be able to do better production for the shows, get some better discussions going. So really want to encourage you guys to do that, to get out there and to support them. I support personally both CARM and Bible Thumping Wingnut, so I'm not asking you guys to do something that I don't personally do myself. Do want to encourage you, like something that Matt said at the very beginning, I want to highlight it because it's something we all must remember. Matt said that one of the things he tries to do on CARM, and you hear it on the radio, you hear it when he discusses here, he doesn't answer for things he does not know and has not studied. And he's trying on the website to be fair with different people's views. Now, not everyone's going to agree that we define their views properly, especially when you have, Latter-day Saints or Muslims that will use words different ways so that they can claim they agree with something when they really don't, or that they will allow for lying on a subject so that they don't have to actually give an answer. Other than that, though, we really want to try to be fair. It's one of the things when I wrote my book, What Do They Believe? I went out of my way to try to be fair with what these different religions believe. I even went to authorities in those religions and said, hey, is this accurate? That's got to be the goal that we want to set. We're not always going to be right, and we're not always going to have great arguments, but one of the things we want to do is we want to be able to identify logical fallacies, and we want to be able to identify when we're using them as well as someone else. And we also want to make sure that we're trying to be fair. The object is not to win an argument. The object is not to be able to pull one over on someone. We've seen plenty of people that try to do that. But the issue here that we want to address is we want to be fair with what people believe so we can get to the heart of the issues. Because as Christians, our real goal is really, when we talk apologetics, the purpose of apologetics, the purpose of looking at these fallacies. Why did we just spend 2 hours tonight discussing logical fallacies? For this simple reason. What we really want to do is we want to be able to discuss these things for the purpose of basically shutting the mouth of the ignorant, as the Bible says. Why? So we can explain the gospel. The goal here at Bible Thumping Wingnut is to get the gospel of Jesus Christ out to as many people as to hear it, because the reality is it doesn't matter if you won the argument and that person still spends eternity in a lake of fire. It's not it's also, as Matt said, it's not an invalid appeal to authority when God says that all people that break his law, all sinners, all liars, will have their place in a lake of fire, which is called the second death. That's not an invalid appeal, because God is the judge, and he is going to sentence people who break his law in that state. And we, I understand that there's plenty of people out here that listen that don't agree with the position that's taken here in Bible Thumping Wingnut, that we are Christians, that we are going to present the gospel. I understand that many don't like that, but understand this, that the reason, and I think I can speak for both Tim and Len on this because I spent a lot of time with them and I know their hearts on this issue. They're not here to win a debate. They're here because they care of each individual that comes in here and has these discussions. They care where you spend eternity. I know Matt the same way and myself the same way. We have a genuine concern for where you'd spend eternity. Even if you want to deny that there's a God and deny where you'd spend eternity, the reality is our concern for you is that we know the truth of where you'd spend eternity if you stay in a state of rebellion against God. With that, I want to close with recommending two resources for you, both from the same author, and they're Jason Lisle. He's someone who I happen to know, but both of his books, one is called The Ultimate Proof of Creation, and though it deals with creation, really what he does is he lays out a presuppositional argument and gets into starting an argument on laws of logic and logical fallacies. Then his second book that Jason Lisle has is called Discerning Truth, a very good book. Again, that one's specifically dealing with logical fallacies. And so what you end up seeing is it's kind of funny. You know what? You have people that just say, well, Jason Lisle's an imbecile. Great example of an ad hominem attack. It's also a great thing that you end up seeing that people that just want to make the case, you know, that they really don't know the arguments. So, but get Jason's books. There'll be two good resources to have on hand. So with that, we're going to go off live. That means that if you are wanting to join in on the YouTube link, we've put in the link to join. These conversations off air go on for hours, and you can join them then. We're going to continue having discussion and want to encourage you guys to join in with that. But we will have to go off air, and we won't have Mixler on. But you will be able to, if you have Bible Thumping Wingnut as one of your regular podcasts, you'll be able to get that regularly each week. And this is one of the things that they podcast or that they release every Sunday night, or actually Monday morning it starts. One person is asking what's up with Mixler. The issue with Mixler is that the Bible Thumping Wingnut, Tim Hurd, could not be here. That's why I am filling in. Again, I'm Andrew Rappaport of Striving for Eternity, but Tim couldn't be here. Tim couldn't get to his computer. We need Tim's computer to set up Mixler, and that's why. So until next week with Matt Slick, get your daily dose of Matt, or at least 5 days a week at Matt Slick Live around the radio, and be listening to Bible Thumping Wingnut, 3 shows a week that they have on podcasts. So till then, see ya.